Hello. I see not the whole design team's here yet. We're missing one. So let's wait a couple minutes till he shows up. We're also missing. No. Hello. So we're waiting for Steve Hanna. My guess is it's been a while since he attended an IETF and he had to go through the data tracker password reset.
Tooling has all changed. Hannes had me jump out of my skin an hour ago. I woke up, blinked at my phone, and Hannes said, "Meeting lapses in 10 minutes." Hannes,
Yeah, that was.
I think I left my skin in bed. I got up so fast.
A time zone issue. I'm not experienced enough with those type of things.
Honest, that was a way to get him awake.
I got his attention immediately.
When non-computer people ask me like, "What's the biggest problem in software?" I'm like, dates, time zones, Unix times. It's been what, 80 years? We still don't know how to do times properly.
Someone should standardize this, right?
We're going to get started then. Steve Hanna's here. Thank you. Carl Wallace and Tim Polk. Thank you all very much for agreeing to be the design team. Let me remind everyone that the note well does apply to this session, and we will be, if you don't recall, this new cool QR code will let you bring up the documents that you need to read in order to understand what your rights and your privileges and your responsibilities are. I'll highlight to the design team, if your way forward is going to bring into something you know is patented, please give us a heads up about that. And please treat each other with respect. It's okay to disagree with an idea, but it's not okay to attack the person with that idea. Wanted to remind people how we got here. Okay, so the CA Browser Forum requires that private keys associated with code signing certificates be generated and stored in an HSM. So if a CSR can contain an attestation that is signed by the HSM that generated that key, then more manually intensive approaches to proving that the key has this property can be avoided. So the document, whoever has their microphone on, could you mute it? Thank you. Then this document, draft LAMP CSR attestation, failed to gain consensus during the working group last call. So the design team is here to propose a way forward for the approaches that are being put forward. So the agenda is following that introduction. We have a presentation by Mike St. John's, who has slides. Presentation by Mike Owensworth. I don't believe I got slides from Mike.
Sorry, how do you want them? I have them in a Google Drive.
If you email them to me, I will post them while Mike St. John's is talking.
Okay.
And
possibly making them PDF before you do it would be lovely.
Indeed. And then we'll make sure there are any questions that the design team has will get answered, and then we'll wrap up. After the session, the design team will recommend a way forward. Then we'll update the internet draft and see if that leads to a working group last call that can gain consensus. Any questions about the agenda?
Does it make sense for the design team to present what we have first. Like, I haven't actually looked at Mike St. John's slides. I'm just wondering about the order of those two.
When we were having the email discussion about the agenda, you were silent, so I went with this.
And you're still
even know
uploading your slides, so I would
I don't even know
argue.
what email thread you're talking about.
Well, at this point, it's too late.
Okay, so I prepared slides that just explain. So yeah, the way this order is, it looks like, we're not going to rebut because we haven't looked at Mike St. John's slides. We just prepared here's an overview of what we designed. So the order might be a little weird, but okay, fair enough, fine.
Okay.
I just wanted to add one comment. It's possible that by the end of this meeting, everyone's on a happy same page. So maybe
you're correct, Carl. That is possible. Let's see what happens. I'm trying to.
With non-zero
okay.
probability, for sure.
Right, and certainly this approach goes back to a feud in the IPsec working group in the 90s, where we were at a fork in the road, and no one could pick the left fork or the right fork. And Charlie Kaufman famously went to the microphone and said, "You all are like a donkey standing between two bales of hay and starving to death. No donkey is that dumb." So that's the origin of this idea. So, all right, so I'm going to put up Mike's slides, Mike St. John's slides, and then I'll turn over the slide control to him.
Okay, where are the controls? Sorry, it's been a while since I've done this. Ah, there we go. Thank you. Cool. Okay, so this is basically my take on the current issues with the issues with the current document. I have provided a draft for review for the design team and the people that are on here, and Mike Onsworth. Mike, you can feel free to share that with anybody else. I prefer it still not be uploaded. You can take that document as my sort of best and final if we went in a completely different direction. So this all started when the CA browser forum asked for a way of dealing with code signing certificates. Apparently, at the time, people were taking pictures of the console of an HSM to prove that the key was, bound to the HSM and wasn't going to be removed. So there was a bunch of discussions. I wrote the first draft, ran through a couple of iterations with folks, and ran out of time because I was doing other things. Handed it over to Mike. Mike continued to get it adopted, and then we went on from there. So draft 01 is probably very close, was somewhat close to what I had originally written, but it changed a bit. Someplace in the middle of this, and again, this is my opinion, we got captured by just use conceptual message wrappers and the RATS folks very early on. But I couldn't figure out how to use a lot of what they wanted to do for the legacy systems I was already using. TPMs, I had a couple of different security modules, basically the IoT small things, and I was actually playing around with smart cards, and I couldn't figure out what I was going to have to do, and it sounded like I was going to actually have to write a wrapper, a CMW wrapper around the stuff at some point along the way. That came a little bit later in the thing. CMW has this one interesting problem that you can't really tell without parsing CMW what type of message it is. And that led to one of the problems I'll talk about later, the hints. Not all CMWs are attestations, and my suggestion that they basically select an OID per type of CMW attestation didn't get didn't do what I wanted it to do. I don't believe the current draft does what I don't believe the current draft meets the need for which it was adopted, and I am pretty sure that everything I'm gonna say here should not be news to the authors of that document. So these are both in decreasing severity and roughly in reverse order of addition to the document. So the things in the document, again, from my point of view, got worse over time. You can take a look at. I'll talk about these specifically later on. I'm just going to go straight forward to the pages. So the last call was about March, although there was a slight attempt to do one in October. And one of the weird things that happened between draft 20 and draft 21 was the abstract changed. And it went from conveyance of evidence and attestation results to conveyance of RAT's conceptual messages. I don't know where that came from. I haven't actually had any conversations with the authors, but I think that's a problem. If this is actually true, this document is not the document the working group adopted. And the CMW folks should probably go and do something that's CMW specific rather than trying to do a general CSR stuff here. And that could actually be done over in the RATS group instead of here. So, inside this document, there's this architecture, which is basically a verifier architecture. And the concept was that the end entity, the tester, would write an attestation statement that would then be verified by a verifier, which would be a plugin provided by an external entity, ideally the vendor providing the stuff. Again, this is all stuff I was told by the authors. The document does include some text saying, well, no, the verifier can be code inside the RA or CA, but it turns out that that may be throwaway code, especially considering what the next problem I'm going to show you. Note down in the lower left-hand corner, none of the conversation between the verifier and the registration authority or CA is defined. It's out of scope for the document. Proprietary or standardized. Basically, you need magic knowledge to implement this architecture, and that was problematic for me. My recommendation was either specify the conversation or remove it. I actually suggest removing it, and we'll see a little bit later why. So the model that they talk about here, they actually have two models. The first model basically has the attester wrapping an attestation in the CSR and sending it to the RACA, and then one of those items, one of those entities turning around and calling the verifier with the attestation and getting back an attestation result. This is their background check model. Now, this is one where I could have collapsed the verifier into the RACA, and basically said, if I know how to do an attestation for a particular type, I can just do it in the RACA, and that would be fine. Problem was that they came along with the passport model. And the passport model now sends an attestation to a verifier from the attester, gets back an attestation result, and then pops the attestation result into the CSR, and now makes the RA and CA have to understand the attestation result, which is, again, completely unspecified. Now, when you actually look at it, the document says that the RACA is the relying party, but the verifier is actually the relying party in this model. The OID is supposed to map to some sort of attestation standard. It goes to the verifier. Verifier turns around and provides an attestation result. Now, in the new model, the attestation result is actually an ASN1 object, and it is a type identifier. I'll get to that on the next set of slides. But a friend of mine once asked the question. Once did the joke. What do you get when you cross a standards organization with the mafia? And you keep getting offers you can't understand. And this is sort of what I'm looking at in this particular document. I don't understand the attestation result, which means I don't actually understand how to issue a certificate based on this model. The PKIX model that we normally think of is you send from the requester to the RACA, and this is the verifier code. Like I said, you can collapse the background check model into this one, but it is impossible to collapse the passport model into this one. And so, again, difficult to go forward with this. The attest results stuff as a specific ASN1 object was added pretty much right before the March last call. When I looked at the first time around, I was just reviewing the ASN1 and identified one basic flaw with it, which has been corrected. But when I started reading through it and trying to understand this, it was, oh, we're just going to treat the attest result as a type identifier, and you can have as many attestation results as you have verifiers, and each one of those formats will be defined by the attestation result. And I was going, no, you really need to have a top-level structure that the CA and RA are understood, that they actually understood. It has to have the signature over the CA or the AR, which means you have to have the certificate infrastructure for the verifier. You have to have how that attestation result is related to the key that you're certifying. The attributes of the attestation engine might need to be passed through that verifier result. And you actually need to know what the attributes of the key are, whether or not it's actually stuck in the HSM, whether it was generated in the HSM, what purpose is the key, and there may be other proprietary attributes to go along with it. Going back to the slide before, the verifier is the creator of the ARC find object, and the CA is the relying party, not for the attestation, but for the attestation results object. It was another level of indirection that sort of was it turtles all the way down. I was afraid we were going to get another level of indirection going, oh, well, you can go to another verifier to get the CA to understand this stuff. We're not there yet, but it was heading in that direction. So I would recommend removing this that whole mess. And if you want to do it in a separate document, not this document. It may be useful for the CMW folk. I think it's overly complicated for the PKI guys. Again, we're moving backwards into things that are less critical. But back in 2024, the evidence statement structure added this hint field. And I spent about an hour and a half on this trying to understand why it was there. And I hadn't actually I really never got to the point where I understood why it was there, because as far as I can tell, the way you do this is you look up the OID and you should be able to verify everything. And he says, oh, no, this is a hint so you can select which verifier under the same type of OID. Turns out it's useful for CMW because CMW is opaque at the PKI level, but it's pretty much useless for everything else. I suggested at one point in time they demote the hint into the CMW attestation statement. They didn't like that. And then I said, well, okay, why don't we do this instead and change the definition of evidence statement so it provides that third field, the aux field, now define the aux field as something that's also controlled by the type OID. So it's an extension. It's an ASM1 class definition that expands upon what you would have for a type identifier. So this was pretty much rejected. Mike Unsworth basically said, "Oh, we can't do this. It's past last call. We would have to redo all the all of our examples." I pointed out that the on-the-wire encoding for their particular example was exactly the same, because they could define an evidence statement where this field was actually a hint, exactly like they had it before. I did take their hint structure, their hint definition, which was IA5 string, and added ASN1 constraints because it's supposed to look like a fully qualified domain name plus a port number. So anyway, so that's where that's going. I would recommend replacing their current evidence statement with this definition, and at least going forward for that. The hint stuff, again, like I said, seems to be only useful for CMW, and this was supposed to be a general, not just CMW thing. And sorry, I misspelled evidence statement. I kept going and trying to figure out how to do the lookup with the verifier and the OIT, and I couldn't come up with something that would work in all circumstances. And we actually spent a number of different times on the website, on the mailing list, talking about this, and nothing ever got me to the point where I would go, okay, I can predictably and consistently get to a particular verifier given a particular setup. So anyway, I would demote this from the evidence statement to the CMW structure, or implement the previous slide fix. I prefer the previous slide fix because it fixed a bunch of things. As long as it's at the top level, it's part of the base requirements for the document, which means everybody has to care about it, even if it's an optional field. If it shows up, you have to know what to do with it. And there is no text that actually tells you how to deal with this field. It's very underspecified. Again, my opinion. Overall, I don't think the RATS model meshed really well with PKI. It seemed to be that the original desire was just provide us with a way of carrying a CMW, and that was actually a discussion before the document was adopted, and the answer was no. But this document seemed to have picked it back up again. The attestation naming conventions are ratified. They differ from existing conventions, things that I've been working with for 10 or 15 years. I can live with vocabulary, but it seems trying to force PKIX into RAT is a problem. I would generally demote everything that's RAT specific into a non-normative appendix, and just don't force it onto the PKI folks without implementation guidance, which doesn't exist here. Could be a separate document, but going forward with this without the implementation guidance doesn't seem to make sense. And then this one just popped up literally sometime in the last 2 or 3 versions of the document. The term endorsement was added. It's probably a RATS term. It doesn't actually seem to make any sense. But again, they can go and maybe add some text with it. I would either remove it or clarify it. It just popped up, and it doesn't actually explain how it differs from evidence or from what I think of as an attestation. So that's where I'm at with respect to this. As I said, I put my money where my mouth is. I resurrected my original document, added and updated things based on discussions we've had over the last couple of years. I literally thought this document was going to be no more than 6 months, and it has actually gotten worse. I believe it's gotten worse over time, gotten less implementable as we've gone along. So anyway, that is me.
Any questions that someone wants to ask regarding understanding of the slides?
Yeah, actually, I have one quick question for Mike. I wasn't clear on this, but is it your opinion that only one of the two models is required by the CA browser forum to meet those requirements in terms of the passport versus the other model?
Yeah, as near as I've been able to tell, the CA browser forum wants an attestation, and in both of these models, the attestation and the attestation results sort of look like an attestation. The problem is that one of them has standards behind it and the other one doesn't. So you could use either of these models, but the level of implementation required to do both for a given CA is high. Does that sort of answer the question?
So just so everybody's on the same page, the level of discussion at the CA browser forum at this point is just at the stage of, gee, it would be nice if we could prove keys are in HSMs. So they'll look at the actual specification once it comes out, but they haven't really thought very much about evidence formats or things like that yet.
Okay, but it does sound like yeah, that was helpful too. But it sounds like you're saying that the CA browser forum requirements could be met with either of the two models, but is what it sounds like to me.
I think that's correct. Yes.
Well, yes and no. I say a yes and no because the first one is a direct thing from an attester. The second one is now you have to trust a whole different set of infrastructure. So there's simple and there's complex. It's sort of like, yeah, I can make a car that I can push with my feet, and maybe get it street legal, but why would I? In this particular case, putting the verifier in the middle of this means a whole new set of trust structures, and you have to basically map across all attestations into the verifier. If the verifier were just one thing, okay, if it were a standard, every CA and RA understands it, I would go, okay, that makes sense. That's not what this is, and that's another 6 to 12 months to do. So taking it out is a better choice in this particular model. If you want to add the ability later on to go to a third party to interpret your stuff, yeah, okay.
Thanks.
I had just a couple comments for Mike St. John's. I think some of the early stuff asserting that the LAMPS draft is for carrying conceptual message wrapper stuff is just incorrect. That draft is no more just for CMW than your draft is just for TPM. CMW is
have you looked at the abstract of -21? That was a direct quote.
No, the direct quote was conceptual messages, and you conflated that into conceptual message wrapper. Those aren't the same terms. I did go and read the abstract, and I read what you wrote, and that's what my takeaway was.
Hang on for a second.
Yeah.
I want to actually go look at the quote.
Okay.
How does the phrase RAT's conceptual message differ from CMW?
Can I answer that?
Yes.
May I answer?
Yeah.
So again, the point of the abstract change there was just to align terminology with RATs. We were not intending to change semantics. So in RATs, RFC 9334 defines conceptual messages. That's a philosophical term, not a wire format. And conceptual messages is the collection of things that you might informally refer to as an attestation. So that includes evidence, that includes endorsement, and that includes attestation results. Conceptual message is the umbrella term for those three things, and maybe more things that we haven't invented yet. That's it. It's just terminology. It does not refer to a specific wire format. Conceptual message wrapper, CMW, is an internet draft, soon to be RFC, that defines a wire format. So one is philosophy, just terminology, and the other is a wire format. As Carl
And I
said,
made
the
them
abstract is
define
conceptual
CMW
message.
in that draft. And it took me a minute to get them to agree to do it. They did not want to define CMW in that draft until I made them.
In the draft that I posted into the chat window, that's the RAD draft, but that's the
That's the
CMW,
draft.
but not the, like, why did RADs need to invent the terms that they did? I don't know. I was not part of that work. I'm just using the terms, and they call and a couple of different terms together collectively as these conceptual messages. Good thing,
Well,
not, I don't know. I don't care.
I would then go back to the, magic knowledge comment I made earlier. Again, I would be surprised if anybody else who heard CMW and conceptual messages didn't think those were the same or pretty damn close to each other. So again, I'm not going to argue about it right now. And in fact, I think the right answer, unless you got specific questions for this, I think we're going to go down a very deep rat hole. So
no, I think this is an important point, because we've been trying to, based on feedback, to refine the wording and to make it fit everyone, because the design team initially was very large. People had no experience with the IETF and its terminology and the ongoing work. And that's where we ended up with these terminology and that terms. We reused them. Of course, we could have gone a different path, but it looked like a good idea at that time. The terms existed. Of course, you then have to follow the references and read the original documents, but that's a separate story.
I think the questions have ended. So I'm going to ask Mike to come do his presentation.
Okay. Yeah, so this is going to be a little bit less detailed, less formal. I have less ASN1 than other Mike did. The point of this slides was just to introduce how the authors got to where we are on the points that we were expecting Mike to talk about. This problem statement, this has been covered a couple times. I just want to point out, we took, as Mike St. John's pointed out, this started off as a narrowly focused document to address the CAB forum requirements, and that's what I have there as my first bullet of my first example, code signing certs FIPS HSM. But we quickly realized that if we're going to do this, we might as well do this in a more general abstract way. And we figured if we can design a solution that also hits the second bullet, then we've got a solution that is fairly broad. And so, yes, there was some scope creep there. The second bullet here is addressing enterprise. So if you imagine, and this maybe doesn't exist yet, but as attestation grows as a technology, you can imagine that there's a big unexplored design space, taking enterprise as an example. If you want to enroll your device, you want to enroll your corporate issue laptop, or you want to enroll your BYOD phone into the corporate thing, and they need to give you a corporate Wi-Fi or VPN cert, the enterprise CA might want attestation as part of that. They might want attestation of the serial number of the device is the same one that IT issued to you, or they may want, if it's a BYOD device, they may want attestation that they're whatever endpoint agents, whatever they might be. And today I know like MDMs have their own proprietary way of doing this, but if we can fold that into standards-based methods, that would be great. So we took this approach of, we're not specifically trying to solve the P11 HSM problem. We're trying to provide a generic way to provide any evidence format defined today or defined in the future in a CSR, which we still thought was a relatively constrained problem. We just the draft then just has no opinion about what payload it's carrying. So that's the design approach we took, is we're going to define a CSR attribute to stick anything that is attestation-y, which is why we switched to the more generic term conceptual message rather than evidence or endorsements, or anything that's attestation-y, carry it. And from the purpose of a CSR, it should have no opinion about what the payload is. And that's because if we can do that, then we can cover all current and future use cases nicely. So the design objectives that we took as our guiding design principles here is we recognize that remote attestation is currently a wild, wild mess of proprietary data formats. TPM, I mean, even TPMs, it's not entirely clear how you get, attestation from a TPM. There's multiple types of data structures that might count as attestation. It's not clear those have well-defined serialization. So even within TPMs, it's not clear exactly what data you're talking about. And then you expand out to Intel, ARM, AWS. I mean, all the HSM vendors. We decided that was not our job to solve. We decided that problem, trying to come up with standardized serializations, was well outside the LAMPS charter. We decided that the IETF already had a working group charter to solve that, and that's RATS. And that whether or not we like the output of RATS, and I agree with Deb in chat, even the authors of this document don't fully agree with the output of the RATS working group, but it is what it is. We took that as a design requirement that this document is an IETF document. RATS is the IETF working group charter to solve this problem. Therefore, we need to be subordinate to the RATS stuff in terminology and in conceptual design. Now, that doesn't mean we need to be exclusive to RATS. And so Mike just said that this document is CMW focused. I disagree with that wholly. CMW is one example of a thing you can carry. But we decided that we needed to at least be consistent with RATS for the sake of working group to working group consistency. So what is the design problem that we set out to solve? We want to specify a CSR attribute that can carry payload with absolutely no opinion about what that payload is. It needs an assigned OID, and it needs a defined way to serialize itself into a byte string. And as long as you have a payload that can do that, you can carry it here. The RATS CMW is one example of a thing that can serialize itself into a byte string and has an assigned OID, but it's certainly not the only. And then, I've got a few slides about passport versus background because that's super relevant here. So, backgrounds, we've been over this. Background, and I do want to make a point here that's a little bit deeper than what was on Mike's slides. In background, the actual evidence or endorsements, and he's right, we have started saying evidence or endorsement. So evidence could be things directly measured by the device. Here's the hash of my firmware. Here's my current config files. Here's my whatever. It measures itself. Endorsements could be, for example, a statement from the manufacturer. The manufacturer could say, and here's the FIPS certificate that goes with this model. So it's external data injected, let's imagine, by the manufacturer. And for this CSR document, we're treating them as the same. Whether something is evidence or endorsement, they're both background check. So those go up to the CA-RA sort of PKI authority, and it's got to parse them out. And what I want to point out here is a couple things. One is that can contain PII. The evidence contains detailed, potentially security sensitive information about the device, such as unique identifiers, such as firmware version, which could indicate vulnerabilities. And it could contain human PII. It's possible the evidence contains the username of the currently logged in user or things like that. So the RACA needs to treat evidence, sensitively, with like legal sensitivity. I have on this slide, although Mike didn't mention it, that the communication between RA and verifier is unspecified. I mean, it's not standardized by IETF. RATS hasn't gotten there or hasn't gotten there yet. So those arrows up and down here do not have standards. But whether or not they have standards, we believe that's squarely out of scope for LAMPS and certainly out of scope for a CSR document. So I do sort of agree with Mike's comment that this is not a fully specified thing, and we're pushing out a document which is a partial solution. And that's, I do agree with that because it's a CSR document. We're not trying to We're not trying to define all of PKI and all of PKI interactions. We are simply trying to define a CSR attribute. And so there are things that are, you cannot implement this picture with what's in the document because we're only trying to solve one small part of this picture. Russ.
So this is a clarifying question.
Please.
In the HSM model, is the end entity is the HSM. It's going to produce some kind of a evidence endorsement. I don't want to get hanked on my terminology.
Conceptual message. Yep.
Sends
Hanked.
it to the RA or CA, and if it knows how to deal with it, there does not need to be a verifier. It can just process it.
Sure. Yeah, we within the authors group, we've been saying the verifier box could be internal to the relying party box, or it could be external. Both are
Okay.
sort of fine.
In which case it's an internal API, not a RPC or whatever.
Sure. The verifier could also be a Linux command line tool provided by the HSM manufacturer. Both models.
Yep, sure.
Exist.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Right. Okay, so next slide is Passport. And Passport differs in that the device itself reaches out to some verifier prior to constructing the CSR and receives back something which is an attestation result. And it's true that attestation result does not have certainly IETF standards. The model here that has come up quite a bit is the last bullet at the top. So imagine that you have a banana phone from your favorite fruit manufacturer. The banana phone is not going to give you evidence. You cannot get evidence at the application layer because the evidence contains all sorts of proprietary gobbledygook that Banana Corp doesn't want you to know. Banana Corp does not want you to know which files in /opt they are looking at in order to decide if the device is jailbroken. You don't get to see that. What you do get to request is that the device phones home, pukes its state to its manufacturer, and then the manufacturer gives you back this attestation result that says, we checked the device, it's good, right? So this is a real thing that we do encounter in the world, especially with closed ecosystem hardware, where the CA doesn't get to see the evidence. We are going to have to deal with these sort of anonymized, cleaned up statements from the manufacturer. And so we have to deal with Passport model. It's a problem that, yes, it's a bit messier, but we don't get to avoid it here, is at least the approach the authors took. And why don't we fold it in? Why do we need to treat it as a separate top level object? Which is a fair criticism to raise. And the answer for why we decided to define a separate top level CSR attribute for Passport model is because the way the RA handles it could be quite different. Assuming that the RA can't parse the payload, assuming the payload is opaque to the RA, like if it does not have a full stack parser, it may still need to handle ARs differently from evidence for privacy or legal reasons. Remember that evidence could contain PII, whereas we generally assume attestation results don't. So at the top level, we decided to tag it differently so that the RA knows right at the top whether it's acting in Passport or background check model. And it's simply basically for routing purposes is why we decided to separate these, make it super, super unambiguous which model you're operating in. So that's essentially what this slide says. So we've, like, at the core, this slide is the core of the document. The document by volume is probably 80% tutorial text, and then there's this like very small amount of ASN1. And this is basically the core of the draft. We're defining two attributes, CSR attributes, one to carry evidence / endorsements and one to carry attestation results. And you can carry one or more of each, and we've got ways to handle the cert chains that you need to verify them and all that. But essentially it's two top level CSR attributes that tell you right off the top whether you're in Passport or background check. Okay, other things that have come up on the mailing list that we thought we would mention here. Mike did not bring this one up, but we're defining an IANA registry, which I don't think we feel particularly strongly about. If Mike had wanted this out, we could take it out. This is asking IANA to create a registry that collects together, here's a list of OIDs you might encounter in the wild. If you are implementing a parser for this, here's a bunch of OIDs that you might want to know about. And so we decided that the criteria, I see your question, Mike, let me finish this slide. We decided that the criteria for inclusion would be if a thing has a well-defined OID and a well-defined ASN1 structure. So Mike pointed out that we weren't being strict enough on requiring a well-defined ASN1 structure, so we've tightened that up since. And then we just have a registry that says, here's an OID and here's a reference to where you'll find the definition of its structure. And currently the only thing that we're aware of that meets those requirements is CMW. We had a few other things in the list that were TCG structures, but actually we realized that they did not have public specifications that publicly defined the ASN1 encoding. So they had assigned OIDs, but they did not have well-defined serializations. So we've since removed them, and now the CMW is the only thing in the list. Not because we're trying to be CMW specific, but because it's the only thing we're aware of that meets the requirements for inclusion in the OID in the registry. Mike, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, this is mostly a don't care for me. I did talk with the IANA folks at the meeting about creating a, if you will, dictionary of things defined elsewhere, as opposed to a registry. So basically you could publish any attest statement, any attribute, any evidence that you defined, and a pointer to where to get it based on the OID. So it may be a separate document. I don't care if you include this in here. Like I said, don't care.
Yeah, I also don't feel particularly strongly about this. Maintaining this might end up being a mess with as everyone wants their proprietary stuff in. So I'd be fine to axe this if that makes the document simpler. Carl.
I have a question on this because I feel strongly that this is not only necessary, but needs to have some teeth to it. You know, not discussed to all of this is the whole point of the CSR attestation draft is to gain confidence that a specific key is the subject of the attestation. And I don't think that's addressed in your draft at all. And it's addressed briefly in one sentence in the security consideration in Mike St. John's draft. And once you throw in that you can have any of dozens of attestations, someone needs to be kind of minding the store to make sure that we have a means of associating these attestations with the public key that's the star of the CSR.
I don't agree that that's the design objective of our draft.
Okay.
This is Carl. This would be something that goes inside the evidence because that's something the attester needs to produce. It needs to say, for this key, it's stored in here. But in the document, as Mike mentioned, it only carries that, passes that already fabricated information over the line, over the wire to the RACA infrastructure.
I didn't say it belonged in your draft. I said there needs to be a binding between these multiple drafts that describe the multitude of attestation statements that we have to live with back to the process here. You're the conduit for this, but we can't completely punt on the fact that there needs to be some binding.
Yeah, totally right. Agree. I need to double check whether we say that somewhere. But initially, like we had some, for example, for the DPM case, we had an example in the appendix. That was the idea. So, hey, you want to know like all the details, and then we started to put the example in there, which Mike and Monty put together. But that didn't resonate well because it was apparently an example that Mike St. John's didn't favor. I don't know. At the end, we gave up on it and removed it. It's still, the idea was to have the different have this registry, and so DCG would then define or republish that what we had in there and define or register an OID for it, and it would end up in that list, and it would have the properties that is are described in that specific document. But you're right. We want to convey information about the key and how it relates to the actual CSR.
And we're at this authors group is also working on a RATS document, PKIX attest, which directly solves the HSM problem. And once we get that thing published, we'll add it to this IANA registry for sure.
Yeah, I made a comment about that as well. But the IANA bit here and the instructions for the expert reviewers seems to be maybe the place where that glue language needs to land. But it needs to be somewhere. It can't just be punted out and you assume all the implementers do the right thing, in my opinion.
Okay. All right. So I'm hearing that this is in fact useful and we should keep it, but maybe this needs a bit of massaging. Maybe rather than a registry, it should be a dictionary, and maybe we should massage the recommendation for the experts. Deb.
So remember that registry setting is actually made in the RATS message wrap draft. And if the DE instructions need to be changed in there, it needs to be changed there, where the actual registry is being requested.
Sorry.
You do? Fun.
This is a different registry from the CMW registry.
You say, really? You're defining two IDPE CMWs in different registries?
No, I am cross-pointing to the IDPE CMW that already exists. This is a registry of OIDs. The CMW registry is a registry of ASCII media types, right? Are we talking about different registries?
No, they're registering in the, hold on, I have the draft up because, you know.
If they create a registry of OIDs, then you'd be right. I thought they created a registry of
hold on.
ASCII. So like but for everyone else's benefit, so what's going on here is CMW has itself an identifier which behaves very much like these OIDs, and they've defined a way of, this is a WebAuthn, this is a Google, this is an Apple.
So they have requested in SMI security for PKIX security extensions registry of the SMI numbers, IDPE CMW.
Sure.
Right. But that's the one we just referenced here. So previously we had a longer list of OIDs in there in this registry as an initial set of values, which could be described here, like the one from the DPM example. But then we sort of stripped all of this and had only basically one entry in that list, which was the one defined by the CMW document.
Hannes, that's not the registry Deb was asking about. She was talking about the one that specifies how to carry a CMW as an extension of a certificate.
Okay, that's a totally separate piece. That is not related to this. So
document. Because that's in the certificate as opposed to in the CSR.
Right.
Correct.
It's a different OID.
Correct.
Yeah. Totally different use case.
They're talking about using the same OID because it's the same structure.
Yeah.
I mean, you know.
Exactly.
It's always good to have duplicates. That was sarcasm, by the way.
Oh, okay.
Deb, we do reuse OIDs to define things like the same type of extension, the same type of attribute. So it's not all that unusual.
Right. We do that all the time.
I don't think that changes my opinion.
I was just thinking, I hope that wasn't my fault.
No, it goes back to PKCS 9.
Was that before you, Tim?
Yeah, that was before me. So I can't take the blame this time.
That was an attempt at an old joke, but it didn't really work.
What?
Deb, are you saying that we should use a different? We can't use a different.
No, I'm just saying that as the AD for both of these groups, I am confused on a regular basis when RATS makes PKIX registrations for things, and then you guys make PKIX registrations that look oh, I don't know, exactly the same.
This
But
is
maybe
not a
they're-
registration. This is a cross-reference. This is intended to be a cross-reference, not a registration.
So where are you cross-referencing it to? Where's the original?
ID IETF RATS message wrap.
So is that not what I was just pointing to? Like, is that not? I was looking at that.
I think we're saying the same thing. We're not
think you're-
defining 1361557135135. We're saying 13651 already exists over there, and it is a thing you might encounter in a CSR.
Right. And so my original comment was, if you want to make things that the DE should do, you should put that in the RATS draft, not in the LAMPS draft.
Yes, but there's going to be many things that we want to reference here which are owned by TCG or owned by Intel or owned by Google or owned by Amazon. And I do not want to run around trying to get Amazon and Intel and Google and TCG to include CSR junk in their specs.
But since this would be in the same, like both documents would be in the IETF, I think we could ask the authors of the conceptual message wrapper to make a registration into this document. They probably will object because they say it takes too long and their document is further advanced, and they would block their document also, but that would be possible.
We can also
It
just
would
create
not
an
block
empty
their
registry.
document. Their documents in a telecheck queue, but they've got 3 weeks. If they actually got in gear, they could get the change made before people started actually reviewing it as part of the telechat.
So this is just initial contents of the registry. You could ask to create the registry empty and then start shoving content into it out of band of this draft if you prefer. Like
We'll defer to people who know more about this registry than I do. Seems odd though.
yeah, I mean, we had CMW as the only initial contents. I'm happy to take that out and create the registry. Ask Anna to create it empty, and then we can put in CMW as the first distinguished expert request, inclusion request, whatever.
Mike St. John's is saying in the chat that he's got some info from IANA. This seems like a good time to talk about it instead of at the end, since it's related to this.
Yeah, please.
Go ahead, Mike.
Russ, can you give me a screen share? Hopefully. All the slots for requested media are already taken. Okay.
I might have to close the brief
stop
first.
sharing.
I have to stop. That has to be taken.
I'll tell you what. Let's do this during the QA. It's going to be simpler doing it then. Let Mike finish his slides. I didn't want to actually interrupt this, so.
Yeah, I think the point is that the registry's in the thing. We know it's a point of discussion. We're happy to change it. We're not particularly attached to it for the reasons Carl said. We thought it would be helpful to implementers to have a list of here's oids you might encounter and here's where you can find their definition. But this wasn't meant to be an integral part of the draft. We're aware it needs work. Happy to take that offline. Okay, I have a couple more slides. The hint. So Mike and I have been back and forth with this hint a lot. And the authors believe there is a problem that cannot be solved without it. We do not believe that problem is unique to the RATS CMW format. We believe that there are other circumstances outside of RATS CMW where you also need the hint. So his suggestion that you bury hint inside CMW is fine for CMW, but doesn't help WebAuthn, for example. And the problem is nesting. It's that there exist things in the world in that wild mess of formats that themselves are container formats. And the two examples that I know of are CMW and WebAuthn, but I'm sure there are other types of container formats in the world. So if I'm an RA and I have a configured set of verifiers, let's say I've got a bunch of command lines and HTTP things I can ping and whatever, some bunch of verifiers I can use. I receive a CSR. I look at the OID. The OID says WebAuthn. okay, is this WebAuthn where I need to use the Yubico verifier? Is this WebAuthn where I need to use the Google verifier? Do I need to use the Apple Cloud Service? The OID just says WebAuthn, and that's not helpful. So there's two ways to solve that problem. Either the RA needs a full stack parser. It needs to start ripping that WebAuthn apart until it gets all the way to the bottom and decides that, oh, this is actually a Google thing, and then it can route it properly. Or we decided to just smack a hint on the top level of the envelope, just smack a hint on the outside. And we've left this sort of intentionally underspecified so that vendors can basically put whatever string they want in there. And it's just a hint. And the way we've written the text is the RA is allowed to ignore the hint. If the RA already knows how to route this thing properly, great, don't use the hint. If you need the hint, then use the hint. Our first pass at this, it was just an arbitrary string. We eventually were convinced that was too wide. So I think currently it's a URN with a port, but we say very clearly, this should not be considered a web address. Don't ping it. It is just meant to be an identifier to help you look up which piece of software to hand this thing to. So that's the intent here. And like I see Mike's point in the chat, don't have an OID called ID WebAuthn. If you have an OID called ID WebAuthn, that's the source of your problems. Okay, but I'm not going to go chasing the W3C and tell them that's not good enough. You need to define device-specific OIDs. Like these things exist, right? These things are in the world. We can have opinions that the OID should be uniquely defining, and that's a perfectly fine opinion, but that's not what we're going to encounter in the world. Real things that already exist, that are already standardized outside of the IETF, where the OID is not sufficient to determine which piece of software can verify it. So that's the hint. I'm sure we're going to have a full discussion on this. The authors believe this is useful. The authors believe this is a minimum complexity thing to be useful to help you solve the nested doll problem. Do we have the debate on this now, or do we have the debate on this later? Hearing nothing, maybe I will continue.
Mike St. John's mentioned before that he had suggested having an OID, and I guess you were just talking about that. And this kind of relates to what I asked you earlier while he was talking. This came up for CMS back in the 90s, and it was solved in that enhanced SMIME security draft that RFC that Paul Hoffman wrote. There's an attribute called content hint, and that's really what you're getting at here is not a hint for a verifier. It's a hint, or actually a statement about what type the parser might expect to find nested down a few layers. So coming up with some type field, if not an OID, or maybe a single digit, as Hannes was just saying, or something else, but that seems pretty tractable of a problem. Why we're making it a name with a port and then admonishing people not to go in and reference that, this seems kind of nuts to me. It
Okay.
really flirts with the notion that there's a verifier protocol, and there's not.
Take a note of that.
There is actually a verifier protocol in the sense that in some deployments there may be just nothing, but in other cases it's a separate box, right? And there's more than potentially, like if you follow the work in the RATS group, when they talk about like different deployments, seeing there are cases where you need to not just know what the evidence format is, but you also need to know who can I pass this evidence statement to. Not every box can verify or has the information to properly parse and evaluate data that comes out of an NVIDIA graphics card. That's at least, and that's
But
like.
You don't. The security consideration here that we need to stay away from, and I think Carl has a good point, you do not want to provide a CSR that gets the CA to ping arbitrary websites. That is security.
Well, that's what we
disaster.
write in the draft, right? that's what we say, and I think that's true.
So I do sort of agree with Carl that putting something that looks like a reachable address and then saying don't reach it is dangerous.
But that's not
port
what
number
I
certainly
said.
implies that this is exactly where you should go. The port number is a temptation to completely ignore that security recommendation.
So if we want to change the hint from a URN to an OID or some numeric identifier, yeah, cool. I have no objection to that. I consider that a good suggestion.
So just a heads up that we have used over an hour already. I'd like to make sure we have time for discussion. So
Okay. Right. So if the suggestion on hint is to change it from URN to a numeric identifier, cool. I don't think it should be able to carry arbitrary data. I think that's exploding the scope. I do think that whatever your evidence or attestation data is, it should be able to serialize itself into a single byte string. And I think being able to split the statement over an aux field, that to me feels like over engineering. Like the whole aux data thing, to me, that's trying to solve a different problem, which is that's trying to get into you don't know how to serialize your thing, which I think is outside the scope of LAMPS. So that's the hint. What else do I have here? Hackathon experience. Okay, I'll go through the last pretty quickly. So Monty and I implemented this on TPM way back in Brisbane, IETF like 2 years ago. We did have to define, and this is interesting, we did have to define some additional structures. So the TPM spits out, we were dealing with the attest certified data, which spits out data in a couple different chunks, the actual attestation, and then the detached signature, and then the verification public key. And so the TPM gives you 3 pieces of data, and to make it fit in our document, we needed to define a wrapper layer, this sequence that tells you how to uniquely serialize those 3 things. So there is glue layer missing. We acknowledge that specifically for TPMs, you need a piece of glue layer. Initially, we had this as an appendix, all these extra ASN1 structures we defined to make the TPM work. We initially had that as an appendix. And then like last month, Monty and I decided, you know what, this doesn't belong in an IETF document. How to serialize TPM attestation actually doesn't belong in a CSR document. It's more general than that. So last month, we actually removed that appendix, and Monty's TCG has agreed to publish this as a standalone TCG document. So we acknowledge that there is a layer gap, and that is a problem, but we don't believe that's a problem to be solved by LAMPS or to be solved in a CSR document. What else? Siemens has implemented this draft. Siemens has implemented the CSR document within their CMP client. Their implementations of both client and RA are open source. Siemens puts an endorsement, that this draft is implementable and complete and solves a real world problem. And that's the whole thing. So Russ, I yield the floor.
thank you. I now want to make sure that all questions that the design team might have been answered. So I'm going to yield the floor to Steve, Carl, and Tim. Go ahead, Steve.
Okay. Well, thank you, folks. Appreciate your presentations and the good discussion that's happened here. It occurs to me that one of the fundamental questions I have about these drafts is, can this solve the problem at hand? It seems to be a very general approach, a very broad approach, but in some ways an approach where many aspects are left to private agreement or otherwise unspecified. And ultimately, yes, there are other things that can be done, but my fundamental question is, can it solve in a good and interoperable manner the problem at hand as described at the beginning with CA Browser Forum? I saw on one of the last slides there that Siemens has implemented it and that it has also been implemented using by Monty and Mike using TPM 2.0. So were those implementations an attempt to solve the CA browser forum? Did they work? Were there big pieces that were unspecified and you had to sort of fill them in by private agreement? That's my question.
Hannes, do you want to respond?
Yeah, so the Siemens stuff wasn't done for private agreement. It used some of the ongoing RATS work, the EAR work, and this attestation results that they are currently defining. So it used those. There are open source implementations which a bunch of companies already use while the standards activities are ongoing. So we reuse those from a sort of verifier part. Like there's a separate set of documents independently being worked on, which we used, which we didn't have to create from scratch.
And also, the Siemens work is not towards the CA browser. Like Siemens does not participate in web PKI. You're dealing with private automotive industrial PKIs, right?
Yeah, this was an industrial IoT use case with
Completely distinct from
our
the
own
capital
PKI.
objective. Steve's
Monty, you're, go ahead. Monty, you're muted.
Steve is also muted.
Okay, not hearing Monty yet.
No.
Maybe I'll respond. I got in queue to respond to Steve's original question. Maybe while Monty's figuring out his audio. So does this solve the problem? And I see Steve, you're asking the same question that Tim Hullbeek is asking in chat. Can you implement this? And the answer is no, because if I take 5 different HSMs, if I take a Luna and an N-Shield and a Crypto 4A and a UBHSM, those things don't produce common data. Like there's nothing I can put in a LAMPS document that will make those 5 devices be capable of producing the same data. So the state of the world today is you get what you get from that device, and you'd better have a parser for it at the top. And that's I do not believe that problem is in Charter for the LAMPS working group to solve. I believe what is in Charter is whatever that device pops out, here's how you jam it in a CSR. I think trying to standardize the internal mechanisms of a P11 device is pretty wildly outside the Charter, which is why we've taken the design approach that we have. Of just
That's very helpful.
We're just trying to tackle this one little piece of the problem, which is once you have the data, how do you transport it to a CA? That's it. That is the entire scope of what we're trying to do here. Provide a transport envelope.
Monty, let's see if we can hear you now. We're still not getting audio from you, Monty. My guess is you're locally muted.
Looks like he wrote his comment in the chat.
Okay, I'm not sure which mic is next.
I think it's me. Steve, I think the question you actually wanted to ask was, given the document, can you write a other document that describes how to take and carry and parse the stuff at the other end? So again, if it's just carrying an attestation statement, I think the answer is yes. Or attestation inside the evidence statement, I think the answer is yes. Again, the problem is when you get to the verifier, that attestation result becomes one of the big problems. So yes, you can write the statement. As far as I can tell, nobody has written it. It would be nice if somebody, like say Mike's company, wrote one for his HSM, but that hasn't happened yet. I do know that there is a draft that I think JP is working on, and other people, on a common attestation, but we're not there yet.
Okay, thanks.
I wanted to pile on to what Mike Onsworth was saying previously. There are different formats and for evidence that are produced by the devices, but there are also attempts to publish those. So there are differences due to the technology being used by different vendors. And so luckily those vendors are also open to publish their stuff. So it's not as bad as it sounds. But the model that the verifier needs to understand it and then can be configured to verify it. And that's what, for example, with the Rayson open source project, different companies have implemented sort of the parsers for their format. So that I think that's a good direction. The Siemens use case, while the RACA is separate from the verifier, it's outsourced only to the extent that it basically sits in another process, in another box in quotes, and runs there. It needs to be configured with all the parameters, but that's it. And I expect this to be a common deployment model also in other environments, because thereby you don't have to implement all the parsers yourself. You can put them into a separate isolated environment. But it's a deployment question, and that's why the document explains that the verifier is a logical entity and not a, like, it's up to you how to do it.
So
Go ahead, Tim.
I think I'm next. Yeah, my first question is for Deb. Mike Onsworth made a statement early on in his presentation that I wanted your take on, which is that this document that we're discussing today is subordinate to RATs. I was expecting him to use the word aligned. And I guess I want to know what your feeling as AD is about the relationship of the documents. I think that actually matters.
So if it is indeed subordinate to RATs, then it needs to move to the RATs working group. Wait, let me turn my camera on. I can do that. And then, shoot. So if it is indeed subordinate to RATs, then it needs to move to RATs. That's my opinion. If it's meant to solve a need for multiple entities, HSMs, people making RATs attestations, whatever those RATs attestations are, then it can stay in LAMPS, because that's a LAMPS function. It's a LAMPS extension. But I'm not sure he meant subordinate quite the way perhaps you or I might interpret that.
Fair enough, but that was what I wanted. That was what I thought, but I wanted to hear your take, because if it was truly that tightly linked, then it would tell us a lot about which of these documents was viable going forward. But thank you for that. Okay, so the next question that I had, I think is there. This is probably for Mike Onsworth or for Hannes. I guess what I'm trying to understand, I think that if the deployment is sufficiently simple, as in when the verifier and the RA are collapsed. Actually, maybe this is really a question for Mike St. John's. If the RA and verifier are collapsed, in that case, are the issues that can you then solve the TPM problem with draft 21 in that case of that deployment?
I would want to get rid of the AR stuff and collapse that. Basically because it's completely undefined. The other piece of it. Sorry,
I'm sorry,
go ahead.
go ahead. You
The
first.
other piece of it is to fix the evidence statement so I can actually deal with. TPM has one common thing that it signs all the time. It's the TPM to be a test. And then to understand that, you need some additional information. For a key attestation, it's that TPMT public or a set of them. And for other types of attestation, it's like the PCR registers and things along those lines. What I would want is to be able to use that field that they currently have as hint as bound to the type that I define. So basically, not only is the statement type bound to the object identifier, but that second field is also bound. So those two fixes would allow me to get forward as long as all the verifier architecture gets demoted to the point where it is not required.
Well, I think that's my next piece of my question, and this is probably for Mike Owensworth, is what is mandatory to implement? I mean, there's a lot of complexity here, and my impression was that you could pick and choose which, an entity didn't need to actually have the complexity of being able to deal with directly with the verifier instead of go and collect results. That you were simply trying to be complete on the waterfront. But what's mandatory to implement? What's not? And how do we end up with interoperable implementations from that?
Yeah, I'm a little surprised and confused that all the verifier stuff is being dragged into scope here. The intent of the authors was just to provide like 6 ASN1 definitions that say if you have data, here's how you stuff it in a CSR. That's it. That is the entire thing we set out to solve here. And I'm a little surprised that we're now being asked to boil the ocean in order to put data into a CSR file.
I don't know. I will tell you that reading the document, I kind of thought we did boil the ocean, and maybe that's why is that we're close enough to boiling the ocean that, but that's my take, and I need to go back and read this all again based on what everybody's been saying. But
possibly we need to remove some of our tutorial content and shorten the.
Well, especially because a lot of it repeats things that are in 9934 or other, right? And so there may be some things that don't have to be there that make it seem like this document is harder than it should be. So, but that's helpful. Thank you. But anyway, on the mandatory to implement, then really all you're saying, what's mandatory to implement is to be able to take the data that you're going to provide or receive, and it's going to have to be, you just want to be able to get it out of those messages.
Right. Yeah. So the intent that we had as authors is the state of the world today is you would go to your CA's website and there might be a box that says upload attestation, and you have to go browse around on your Windows file and File Explorer and find the thing and upload it to a website, and then you'll be allowed to submit a CSR. And we just wanted to be able to put that in here. That's it. That's the entire scope of what we set out to solve. And if the CA knows how to parse it, great. And if it doesn't know how to parse it, that's out of scope of this document. That's what we intended to do.
If it doesn't know how to parse it, it should reject it.
Right.
I mean, you would think. But if it doesn't have enough. Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right, I think I'm up. I just kind of 3 points to make. One of them we already talked about, which is the binding point. Somewhere, possibly in this registry or dictionary or whatever Mike St. John's is going to talk about, needs to describe how when I get my CSR, I know that the attestation that I'm verifying or that I'm sending elsewhere to be verified corresponds to the key that I'm going to issue a cert for. And that's the whole point of what we're doing here. The second thing is all the discussion about hint. I think talking about verifiers relative to the hint is really just dragging this out. I really don't see why this hint is any different than the content hint that's used for CMS. And if we level it on the types that would appear in the attest statement field, then this would be over. It's just indicating what's down at the leaf layer, I think. And if you want to use fancy verifiers elsewhere, then you have some map in your implementation that maps that type onto a verifier. And then lastly, attestation results. I tend to agree with Mike St. John's that at present, attestation results aren't well baked enough to be discussed here. And the reference, I think, is probably wrong to AR4SI. It probably should be to EAR. And I floated the idea on the RATS list that those two drafts should just be merged. I think I understand the history of why they're separate, but I think at this point in time, putting them in one draft probably makes more sense. And by all means, we should aim for a future where we have one attestation result format, not like all the different evidence formats that we have to deal with now. As far as how this draft could incorporate attestation results, the CMW type might provide a graceful way forward for that by defining CMW support now, which would be a peer to a TPM attest statement or Google or YubiKey or whatever. That would give you a way to incorporate an attestation result for CAs that were willing to accept that. Some CAs might want to verify all the evidence themselves. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, I was just very surprised, Carl, that you said that, if I hear you correctly, that you wanted to use the CMW type, which was something that Mike St. John's previously violently objected to. But that was not the point I was trying to make, so we should probably discuss this further. But the reason I wanted to comment on the tutorial nature of the draft, because we noticed while doing this work in the design team as well, that there was the understanding of attestation, remote attestation was very non-existent, I would say. And so it took a while to explain different things, and different people, including Mike St. John's, asked us to expand on different aspects to make it more clear. And that is the outcome ultimately. And maybe it served that purpose. So I would appreciate someone with fresh eyes like Tim or Carl or Steve to look through and let us know which part of the tutorial you consider not relevant at this point in time anymore. Happy to remove that. It was a pain to write it, but happy to let it go as well if you think it's not serving its purpose well.
We've got 2 minutes left, so please keep your comments short.
Just quick, I don't think you need to be married to RATS terminology, nor do you need to be married to PKIX terminology. If you make it generic terminology and then let the examples give you specifics, like for RATS or for PKIX or for HSMs or for TPMs or whatever. That's it.
I see that Carl actually found the bullet that he was missing, so I don't have any comment.
Okay, I see the queue is empty and that we have less than a minute left. So I want to just make sure the design team has what they need to go off and chat among themselves to come up with a way forward. Tim? Tim, I'm not hearing you.
Sorry about that. Would you say, is this a complete description of the issues that were still open?
Yeah.
Because we only heard from Mike. I want to be sure that there aren't other issues that were discussed during last call that we haven't heard about. That's all.
I think these are what I would call the open issues.
Okay, thanks.
Steve?
All set.
Thank you. All right. I will reach out to the design team, figure out whether we need to do anything to facilitate the three of you getting together. Other than that, I think we've done the brain dump. We're looking forward to wisdom. All right. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.